we get to play with histograms. And like I was just saying, kind of like a bar graph, except with a range of values in each portion instead of just one. Okay, so let's see what we got to work with here. All right, we got a varsity boys basketball team. Okay, 15-5. Total points scored by the team for each of the 20 games listed below in the order in which the games were played. Okay, so all I have to do this time, unlike when we were doing stem and leaf, is figure out which range they fall into and just put marks in the column. So for instance here, okay, 76 would be 70 to 79, okay. And I'm just gonna work my way along the list, putting a little mark in that range each time. And it's probably a good idea to mark it off in case I get distracted or tend to be forgetful at times. So I get those all in there. And when we're looking at something as far as frequency goes, the one thing I want to know is, how many total are there? Because when I get to the end, I should be able to look at my histogram and figure out if everything balances. Well, they were nice to me and told me that there were 20 games. So my frequency is 20. And then all I'm going to do for each of these is I'm going to make a fraction out of them. So since I got 3 tallies here, okay, 3 out of 20 of their games, they got 40 to 49. 7 out of 20, they were at 50 to 59. And I'm just going to do that for each of the values all the way down the chart. And if I've done things right, 3, 10, 17, 19, 20, it'd add up to 20 over 20, and it does. So once I have that part set, oh, am I going to fit it both in? Oh, just by the smallest of margins. Okay, so we're going to create a histogram or a bar graph type using the frequency table. Now, here's how this typically is going to work. And we'll even take note of the note here. I shouldn't have any spaces between bars because there's no gaps between the intervals. So basically what that means is each of these determine my points scored. So my points scored, which you can't see, so I got to come up here. We want to always label our axes. So the number of points I scored is going to go along the bottom. And the number of games that it occurred will go along the side. Because somebody looking at this should be able to tell what's this even a graph of. But here's a couple of the differences. I noticed my greatest frequency in my chart was there were 7 times they scored some points and the least was 0. So it looks as though I'm pretty safe to make each of my lines worth 1 as far as the number of games goes. But with my points, maybe I call it the 40s and then the 50s. As long as I'm describing that it's not just one single, let me zoom in a bit here, that it's not one single number that's being represented, but a range of numbers. So if you literally wanted to put 40 to 49, you could. Or if you wanted to, well, but we don't want to have spaces between bars. We don't want to skip. 40s, 50s, 60s, 70s, just like up in the points scored chart up above. So once I get that set, now I'm going to go back up to my chart, look at my tallies, and figure out how tall each of my bars are going to be. So like for instance, 40 to 49, there were 3 of them. So in my 40s, I'm going to go up to the 3. In the 50s, we're all the way up to 7 because it happened 7 times. Looks like the same for the 60s. My 70s were all the way down to 2. I didn't score in the 80s at all, so we just leave that one. And then the 90s, there's only 1. And yes, you have to leave the blank one even if there's a 0 because we want people to be able to see that gap. It's like, wow, they really scored crazy that one game, but most of the time they were back in this area because it lets you basically see how much of an average you would be looking at. You know, okay, this team scores in the 50s or 60s most of the time with their games, and that seemed to work and be pretty successful for them. But it's just taking the data from the table and making it into something graphic is basically what we're trying to do here. So, now back here we're actually going to get to do some values. We're going to do one more of these, but then we can actually get the values a-rolling here. So we got scores on a math quiz. Again, just a quick chart like this works absolutely fine. Again, for each one, we're just going to put a quick little mark inside our chart. Ooh, this quiz didn't go incredibly well. But it could be worse. Now, before you start marking anything else down, this time they didn't tell us how many math quizzes were taken. We want to know this. So I'm going to take a quick count in the list and see if it matches my tally. 1, 2, 3, 4, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19. Okay, 20 there. 6 and 2 is 8, and 4 is 12, and 5 is 17, and 3 is 20. Okay, I'm feeling good now. I just wanted to double check myself. So 6 out of 20, 2 out of 20, 4 out of 20, 5 out of 20, 3 out of 20. And again, those all add up to 20, so I'm feeling good. So when I go to make my histogram, same idea. What am I going to label the bottom of my graph? Because before over here I was doing basketball scores. What am I going to list down here at the... Yeah. Okay, so these will be my quiz scores. And again, make your interval any way you want to. I mean, if you didn't like it when I was doing 50s and all that stuff before, oh, watch what I'm going to do now. I could look at this and go, okay, 50s, 60s, 70s. You know, if seeing all those things together kind of gets at you, doesn't mean we can't turn the paper a different way and get it the way we'd like it or make it a little bit easier. Spin back here. The world is spinning. Okay. And then I look to see, and my frequencies go from 2 to 6. Now, it doesn't mean I'd make my bottom line 2. Okay, you still want to be consistent. You don't want to make your graph look funny and make your data look like it's not really what it actually is. So what I'm going to do here, again, is take a quick peek up at my chart and then start making my histogram. So 50 to 59, we had 6 of those, so that's as high as this is going to get, unfortunately. We don't like this being the highest column. 60 to 69, there were 2. 70 to 79, if I come back down here a little bit more, there were 4. 80 to 89, I had 5. And 90 to 99, I had 3. So that's actually a pretty consistent test overall. But even with these, I can get the data of what I want. Because we've had different ways of finding the different pieces, but this gets a little more interesting. Because in question 3, it says, in what interval does the median lie? Where you're like, well, I don't know. I mean, I guess I could look at every single number. I really don't want to do that. But, you know, what else can I do? Well, if I wanted to, once I made my histogram, I could look at it and, well, I'll show you a couple ways you could do it. You could, unless you colored in really dark, you could just start making dots or X's and kind of go and work your way towards the middle like we did before until your dots came together. And then you're like, oh, all I have left are numbers in the 70s. So they're in the 70s. Now here's your other option, especially if your frequency turns out nice. If I didn't want to do it on the graph, I could look and say, hey, there were 8 values in the 50s and 60s. There were 8 values in the 80s and 90s. So they kind of cancel each other out, and all I have left are the 70s. That would work. So either way, you can do this to make it work, or you can even list the numbers out again and just start crossing them out. But what we get to finish here is we get a small tidbit peek into tomorrow. Like, in what interval does the lower quartile lie? Like, what? Lower quartile? What are you talking about? So, all right, let me give you a quick intro to how this is going to work. When we have all these numbers, okay, the median is the number in the middle, okay? There are also medians for your upper and your lower half, okay? The median of my lower half is called the lower quartile. And again, that is just the median of the lower half of values. So when we're trying to find the lower quartile of this data set, wherever I know the middle is, I'm going to start looking to the other side of that. So let me come back down here for a minute. I think the table is actually going to be our best bet. Because I start to look, and I'm like, okay, the middle was in the 70s here. Okay? If I even looked at my table here and said, okay, so there were 8 values, there were 8 values. So these are split. So what's that mean? Well, a couple of things. One, if I'm looking at the lower half, okay, so we'll kind of visually look at it like it's a lower half. 2 of my values in the 70s are going to get counted up here. So if I thought about that for a minute, I'd be like, okay, 6 values here, 2 and 2. So even if I didn't know these numbers, okay, because I don't know an exact value, I could if I really wanted to play with this. But let's just think of it this way. If I had 6 numbers in the 50s, I'm just going to write them down as 50s for right now. I'm just trying to get my head wrapped around this a little. I'd have 2 in the 60s, and I'd have 2 of them in the 70s. Just by looking at it that way, trying to figure out which interval it's in, if I just started whacking until I ran out of numbers, I see that my median in my lower quartile is going to be somewhere in the 50s. Okay? And that's what I'm trying to find. We normally don't use histograms to find quartiles like this because we don't have a lot of exact values at times. But it's nice to be able to see, and it's also nice to get that little bit of an intro to things. So here is how we are going to put this to use. I am going to work through the first big problem on the front with you to get you kind of kick-started here. So now we're over to the homework. The last one was the notes. Homework, just like it says there. All right. Jim Shorts is a star basketball player for Arlington High School. The number of points scored by Jim in each of his last 20 games are as follows. Complete the table to find the number in each interval. Okay, we've done this a bunch already. So we can start marking these off. He scores lots of points. And again, mark them off as you're doing them because we don't want to forget one. But we'll go back and double check at the end anyway. All right, so it was 20 games, so we know it should be out of 20. 1, 5, 10, 13, 17, 20. Okay, so we feel good there. So only one time in 20 games did he score under 10. 4 out of 20 in our 10 to 19. 8 out of 20. 4 out of 20 for 30 to 39. 3 out of 20, 7, 15, 19, 20. Okay, everything adds up. You always want to make sure your chart adds up, because otherwise we got to see what's wrong here. So we got the first part done. Which interval contains the greatest frequency? 20 to 29. That's where he scored points in that range the most often. Okay, we got that one. In what percent of these 20 games did Jim score 30 or more points? Now, which intervals do I want to consider here? Yeah, because here, 30 or more would even include the 40s part here. Okay. So there were 7 games that he scored over 30, but that's not what they're asking. What percent? So 7 games out of 20, and X would be my percentage on this, because the percent proportion is probably going to be the easiest way to go for most of you. So we cross multiply. And it looks like about 35% of the time Jim was 30 or more. That's pretty good. So then when we get to D, in what interval does the median of this data set lie? Again, I can look at the frequencies and figure this out. Where do you see the largest frequency at? Okay, 20 to 29. If I started to count in from the edges, and I kind of cut off the middle from everything else, okay, there were 5 events that happened 0 to 19. There were 7 that occurred here, so that's almost the same, and then there's a whole bunch in here. So instead of having to look at all that info, I do it this way. Now I could do it like I did in the note sheet and just write a bunch of, zeros and 10s and 20s and mark them off. I mean, that works. It just takes a little longer. And then we get to do the quartiles again. The upper quartile is just the median of the upper half. Oops, let me get that back on here. So I start to look at these and I'm like, okay, well the middle would be 10. So if the very middle of all of this, I had 7 here, I'd have 3 more there. Again, I'm pretty sure it's 30 to 39, but if I'm not sure, 3, 4, and 3, I could list off 3, 4 of these, and 3 of these. Okay, just in general. I don't have to have the specific numbers from the chart even. And then I would just start marking them off, just like I do on any median that we're doing. And I'm like, oh, it's 30, so it's the 30s. Okay, or 30 to 39. So some of this is going to be kind of common sense logic is what we're going to be looking at. Or just doing something quick with a sketch. Even though I thought it was the 30s to begin with, I wanted to double check, so I did something that was going to be a little bit quicker for me. And then the last part here is going to be, again, making a histogram for Jim's scores. And again, you've got to have labels on these. So like if I get down here to this part, so here'd be Jim's scores. And again, my frequency is all about the number of times he did it, or the number of games that he did it in. And some of you may want to be real specific with this. So let's see, the highest number there is going to be 8. So I'm going to get my games part labeled here first. Some of you may decide, you're like, I don't like this whole 0s and 10s and 20s thing. I actually want to have the interval on there. Well, if you want to do that, I'm going to turn this to the side here for a minute. So maybe you leave yourself some space and you do 0 to 9, 10 to 19, 20 to 29, 30 to 39. I guess I should have moved this down a little. 40 to 49, and we weren't over 50, so I don't really need another one. So once I have this set up, labeled my axes, got my numbers labeled, I'm going to go back to my chart, the right way up, and start looking at the intervals. So again, on 0 to 9 up above, we said there were 1 of those. So we go to 1. 10 to 19, there were 4. 20 to 29 was our big grouping, 8. 30 to 39, we had 4 again. And we had 3 in that 40 to 49 range. And I've got my histogram, which again shows basically more times than not he was going to be somewhere between 20 and 29. And I can use it for information like that. The problem on the back of this sheet basically does the same thing, kind of gives you more practice doing the same types of questions with another one. But then let me flip past that for right now. Towards the stem and leaf plots like we were doing yesterday. And so again, what we're doing up at the top and again down below, and I'm going to end up doing some in 8 through 11 with you because that one's kind of different. But again, remember, you have stems and you have leaves, and together they form numbers. So like, for instance, like they have here, 13 and then the line 8 means 138. 10, and then on this side of the line I have 100, 102, another 102, and so on. So when they ask in 4 through 7 to make a stem and leaf plot for the data sets, we're going to tweak this a little. We're only doing 4 and 6. Okay. We're still going to find the mean, median, mode, and range. Oh, excuse me, the median, mode, and range. Now I'm making up things. But it would be your job on one of these, for instance, if we were doing 4 with a stem and leaf plot. Okay, my lowest number is 6. What's my biggest number in number 4? 38. Okay. So I'm going to have some stems that are 0 because I have single digits. 1, 2, and 3 because I go into the 30s. And then basically I'm going to start at the left of the list. Okay, that's a single digit, so 8. 19 means I put a 9 here. Now, what's bad about what I'm trying to do right now this way? Yeah, you're like, oh man, Hardy, why are you being that way? Because I want to go back, and when I'm doing these, scratch that. I want to do them in order from least to greatest. So I want to find all of my single digit numbers so I can list them properly. Once I've done that, okay, I can get rid of them. So then I'm going to look for my numbers in the teens. Start with the least, work my way up to the greatest. Okay, then I'm done with those. 20s. Lots of 20s. 20 would be 0. 23. I have two 24s, so I do need two 4s. And a 27. Those are set. And then in the 30s, I got 35, 36, and 38. So that would be my stem and leaf. Let's do the last two first. What's the mode for this one? Okay, my mode would be 24, because it's the only number that shows up twice. Okay, it's the number that shows up most often. What about my range of numbers? Right, because it's my biggest number, 38, minus my smallest number, 6. So that would be 32. Good. And then my median, remember, this is the one where we start at the edges. So we go, okay, one off the biggest, one off the smallest. Next biggest, next smallest. Next biggest, next smallest. Big and small. Big and small. Until I run into the middle where I have nothing left. My median ends up being 23. So just count from both edges. And if you need to rewrite the numbers in a list to make them work a little bit easier for you, that's okay. And then the last thing, I'm just going to bump up here a bit. The back-to-back stem and leaf plot. And again, besides temperature, I don't see a whole lot of times that this gets used because it's kind of strange the way that it looks. So for instance here, like if you're looking in the middle, going this way is 63 or 64. Going this way is 65, 69, 69. So I can show the basic low and high temperatures. Doesn't mean for the same day or anything like that. So find the range. What's the lowest temperature on either side? 57, okay? So my low temperature is 57. What's the highest temperature I see in the list? 80. Oh. Why did I just, oh? What's the question asking for? Yeah, I gotta read carefully. Find the range for the high temperatures. 57's not in the high. Now the 80 is good. What's the lowest high temperature I have? 65. An important lesson as we head a month away from standardized testing on reading carefully.
Why is it 5, 6, 7, 8?
Because this is still telling me I'm in the 50s or 60s or 70s or 80s, but it works for both sides this way. So like if I go this way, it's 63 or 64 in the lows, but that 6 also, if I go to the right, can work to highs that are 65, 69, or 69. So that can get to be a little tricky. So like when it says find the median for the low temperatures, okay, my low temperatures, again, I'd start with the lowest and the highest, low and high, low and high, and I end up with a median of 64. Now if that whole process, you look at that and you go, how do you just randomly keep marking things off? What are you doing? It might be easier for some of you to just take a moment and to just write the temperatures down for the lows here. And then go 1, 1, 1, 1, 1, 1. Oh, it's the number in the middle. Okay. Either way works, okay? Do what's sensible. Don't just look at it and say, I'm not going to do it. Find a way that makes it work more for you and do it. If it's writing them out in a list, write them out in a list. If you can mark back and forth until you get to the middle and get your median, that's fine. All right, find the mode for the high temperatures. 69, because it's the only one that shows up twice. And then the last thing down here on the bottom is to make a back-to-back stem and leaf plot for the following. Find the median and mode for each set. Okay, I will help on A. All right, what is the lowest and highest number we see in list A? 71 is the lowest. 86 is the highest. Okay, so it looks like I'm only going to have 2 stems to work with in the middle, 7 and 8. Now again, just like before, I'm looking, and even down here, it's not going to be, any more than that. Now set A would go off here to the left. Set B would go off here to the right, but they're going to use the same stem. Now, just like before, when I'm doing my A's, I've got to go in order. So I'm going to be heading to the left here. So my smallest number we said in A was 71. Okay, so there's that. What's the next smallest number? In list A. 74. Okay, so I get 4. Let's see. 75. How many of them are there? 1, 2, 3. 4 of those. So 1, 2, 3, 4 5s, because I have 4 75s. What's next? 76. 79. Okay, and I'm done with 70s then. So then I drop down to the 8, and I say, okay, so I got an 80. Ooh, I have another 80. What's next? 82, 83, and 86. And that would complete my A portion of the stem and leaf. Now, your job is going to be to finish off B, but also to find the median and mode for each. And again, if you've got to list them, list them. If you can mark them off from the list, do it that way. But it just gets you a little extra practice with those. And I'd put the graph paper there just in case you wanted to do something on it instead of trying to scribble on here, but I don't know if any of you care or if you don't with that. So I will leave that be. Tomorrow we will get our initial start into box and whisker plots. Those are kind of fun to play with. And we're also going to get to play with the universal screener last part. So that will be then.